The space dock was quiet except for the sound of humming engines and the echo of tools clanging against metal. Dozens of ships floated in their berths, their hulls glowing under the blue lights of the maintenance bay. Among the crew, a human engineer named Mark Rivers worked silently, checking the damage on a large alien cargo ship. He had been assigned to assist the Viren Empire's royal fleet, known for their beauty, arrogance, and explosive tempers. That day, one of them arrived, Karel, a young alien girl with silver skin, golden eyes, and a reputation for trouble. She was the daughter of a Viren commander, proud and untamed. Every technician avoided her. Everyone knew what happened to those who made her angry. She stepped onto the platform in her royal uniform, tail flicking sharply. "Human," she barked, pointing at Mark. "I want my ship ready within the hour." Mark didn't even look up. He kept working on the damaged plasma coils. "You'll have to wait," he said calmly. "The energy lines are unstable." Her eyes widened. No one ever told her to wait, especially not a human. "You dare talk back to me?" she hissed. "Do you know who I am?" Mark stood slowly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Yes," he said simply. "Someone who doesn't understand how engines work." The nearby mechanics froze. One of them whispered, "He's dead." Karel's tail lashed as her voice rose. "How dare you!" She slammed her fist onto the control panel, sparks bursting out as glass cracked. The ship's interface flickered and died. Mark sighed, glancing at the broken panel. "Now it'll take 2 hours," he said quietly. Her anger turned to disbelief. "2 hours?" she shouted. "Fix it now." He met her glowing eyes without flinching. No. That single word hit her harder than a weapon. No one had ever said that to her. Not her guards, not her tutors, not even her father. For a second, she didn't know what to say. The entire dock had gone silent. Mark walked past her, picked up a replacement console, and began to install it. She followed him, fuming. "You will regret this, human," she snapped. He turned his head slightly. "You already made me regret it," he said dryly, tightening a bolt. The line between them was electric, her pride against his patience. He didn't shout. He didn't kneel. He just kept working. Somehow that calm defiance unsettled her more than fear ever could. When she moved closer, her voice softened, but her anger didn't fade. "You think you can teach me?" Mark paused for a moment. "No," he said. "I think you can learn, if you stop yelling long enough to listen." Something inside her twisted. His tone wasn't cruel, it was steady, like someone speaking to an equal. She didn't understand it. In her world, rank was everything. But this man didn't care who she was. He cared about what she did. When the system rebooted, Mark pressed a button and the engines whirred back to life. The blue glow returned to the hull, lighting both of their faces. "There," he said. "It's running again. Try not to break it this time." Her jaw tightened. She wanted to scream at him, to show her authority, but her voice refused to come out. The humans around them were staring, waiting for an explosion. But instead, Karel just stood still, heart pounding, unsure why his words stayed with her. As Mark packed his tools, she finally asked, "Why didn't you fear me like the others?" He looked up at her, his eyes calm. "Because fear doesn't fix engines," he said. "And it doesn't fix people either." She didn't know how to answer. For the first time in her life, someone had spoken to her like a person, not a princess. She hated it. And she couldn't stop thinking about it. When Mark left the dock, Karel stared after him, her reflection glowing in the metal floor. Her hands were trembling. Not from anger this time, but confusion. She whispered to herself, "A human dares to discipline me." And for the first time, the thought didn't make her furious. It made her curious. Something inside her had shifted, and deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The next morning, the space dock was buzzing again. The hum of engines and the chatter of workers filled the air, but the moment Karel entered, silence followed her like a shadow. No one dared to look directly at her, except one man. "Mark," was already there, kneeling beside the ship's power conduit, tightening a row of cables. His hands were steady, his face calm as if yesterday's storm never happened. Carell stopped a few meters away, her eyes narrowing. She had spent all night thinking about him. That human had defied her, corrected her, and walked away unpunished. It was strange. Normally, she would have ordered him to be removed or worse, but something about his control made her hesitate. "Human," she called sharply. "I want to inspect the repairs." Mark didn't look up. "Be my guest," he said, still working. The tone of his voice, casual, unafraid, irked her even more. She marched toward the engine room, but as she touched the main control, a spark shot out. The hum of the ship changed. Red warning lights flashed across the panels. Mark's head jerked up. "What did you just—" Before he could finish, the reactor's core temperature began to rise. Steam hissed through the vents. The sound was sharp, angry, dangerous. "I didn't touch anything," she snapped defensively. Mark sprinted toward the controls. "You touched everything," he said, quickly shutting down power to half the ship. He worked fast, fingers moving across the switches. "Congratulations, Princess. You just overloaded the energy feed." Her tail bristled. "Don't call me that." "Fine," he said, not looking at her. "Then start helping." "What?" She blinked. "You broke it," he said, grabbing 2 tools from the kit. "You're going to help me fix it. That's how you learn." She stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. No one, absolutely no one, had ever spoken to her like that. "You can't order me," she hissed. "I'm not ordering," Mark said. "I'm teaching. There's a difference." The other crew members exchanged looks, unsure whether to intervene or run, but something in Mark's tone kept them frozen. Carell hesitated, then grabbed one of the tools with a defiant snarl. "Fine, show me." "Good," Mark said, a small grin forming. "Now start with that panel." "No, not that one. The smaller one. Don't force it." "I'm not forcing." Snap. The tool slipped. Sparks flew again. She flinched and almost dropped the wrench. Mark sighed. "That's what I mean. You rush, you break things." Her golden eyes glared at him. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "Not really," he said dryly. "I'd rather not die in a reactor explosion." She bit back her pride and followed his instructions carefully this time. Minutes turned to hours. Sweat formed on her silver skin. Her arms ached, and her royal patience wore thin. But slowly, she began to understand the rhythm: tighten, connect, balance, breathe. Mark didn't scold her again. He corrected gently, explaining things she never cared to know before. "Machines don't care about your title," he said, adjusting a wire. "They care about respect. Same goes for people." That sentence hit her harder than any insult. She looked at him quietly, unsure how to respond. When the engine finally roared back to life, Mark stepped back, wiping his forehead. "There," he said simply. "You helped fix it." Carell stared at the glowing core. The sound, it wasn't angry anymore. It was smooth, calm, alive. For the first time, she felt a strange pride that didn't come from her rank, but from her effort. "I helped," she murmured, surprised by her own words. Mark nodded. "Yeah, you did good." Something inside her shifted again. Praise from him felt different. It wasn't fear-based or formal, it was earned. As he packed up his tools, Carell crossed her arms and tried to hide the small smile on her face. "You think this makes us equal, human?" He shrugged. "No. But maybe it means we can work together without breaking everything." She didn't reply, but her tail flicked once, a sign of silent amusement. For the first time, she didn't leave in anger. She stayed to watch him finish. As he walked away, she looked down at her hands, still stained with grease. They were trembling again, but this time it wasn't from rage. It was the beginning of something new. A lesson she didn't expect. The alien girl who once shouted at everyone had just worked beside a human, and for the first time in her life, she didn't hate it. The third day began with the sound of plasma cutters and the sharp hiss of coolant pipes. The space dock was alive again, but this time, something was different. For the first time, Carell wasn't shouting orders or showing off her royal badge. She stood beside Mark, sleeves rolled up, holding a toolbox almost as tall as her torso. The crew watched in disbelief. The same alien girl who once threw a wrench across the room was now standing quietly next to the human engineer, listening. Mark didn't say much. He handed her tools, gave short instructions, and worked with calm focus. His silence wasn't cold. It was steady, grounded like a wall she could lean on without realizing it. Carell tried to hide her curiosity. Every movement he made had purpose. No wasted energy, no panic. Humans were supposed to be weak, emotional creatures. Yet this one seemed stronger than any soldier she had met. "You humans," she finally muttered. "You work like machines." Mark smiled slightly without looking up. "That's funny," he said. "I was just thinking how you work like one too." Only louder. Her jaw dropped. "Louder?" He looked at her now, his expression unreadable. "You talk too much when you should listen." Her golden eyes flashed, ready to snap back, but she stopped herself. Instead, she exhaled slowly. "Then show me again," she said quietly. Mark raised an eyebrow, surprised. "You sure?" Carell nodded. "I don't want to break it again." For the next hour, they worked side by side. Sparks danced across the panels like fireflies. The smell of metal and oil filled the air. Each mistake she made, he corrected gently. Each time she grew frustrated, he said nothing, just waited for her to calm down. At one point, a plasma coil overheated. Carell reached to fix it, but the metal was hot. Too hot. She winced and pulled her hand back, smoke rising from her skin. Mark didn't hesitate. He grabbed her wrist, ran to the coolant valve, and plunged her hand under a steady stream of chilled vapor. "Don't move," he said firmly. Carell stared at him, surprised. His touch was gentle, but his tone left no room for argument. For a second, her heart beat faster. Not from pain, but from something else. No one had ever cared enough to stop her from hurting herself before. "You could have burned your whole hand," Mark said, wrapping a small band around her wrist. "You rushed too much." "I didn't want you to think I was weak," she whispered. He looked at her, calm as ever. "Getting hurt doesn't make you weak. Refusing to learn does." She fell silent. Those words lingered in her mind like a quiet echo. They went back to work. The hum of the ship filled the background. For once, Carell didn't notice the time passing. Every spark that lit up between them felt like a small connection. Two completely different worlds finding rhythm. When the final plasma arc faded, the engine lights pulsed back to life. Steady, bright, perfect. Mark wiped his forehead, then looked at her. "Not bad," he said. Carell smiled faintly. "Better than yesterday?" He nodded. "Much better." She hesitated, her pride fighting her tongue, but finally said, "Thank you for teaching me." Mark leaned on the console, half smiling. "Don't thank me yet. You've still got a lot to unlearn." Her tail flicked again, but this time it wasn't anger, it was amusement. "You talk like my father." "Then maybe your father's smarter than you think," he said. Carell laughed softly, a sound the crew had never heard from her before. Some of them stopped to look, an alien princess laughing with a human mechanic. It felt impossible, and yet there it was. As the dock lights dimmed to evening mode, Carell looked at her reflection in the metal wall, sweaty, covered in grease, and smiling. She barely recognized herself. Mark gathered his tools and said quietly, "Same time tomorrow?" She nodded without hesitation. "I'll be here." When he walked away, she stood alone in the quiet dock. The hum of the ship surrounded her. A calm heartbeat she helped restore. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a commander or a princess. She felt like someone real. And deep inside, Carell knew this human had done something no one else ever could. He hadn't broken her spirit, he was rebuilding it piece by piece. In the silence between sparks. The mess hall of the space dock was usually loud, filled with chatter, laughter, and the metallic clang of utensils. But that day the mood was different. Whispers traveled like static through the air. Everyone had seen it, the proud alien princess working beside a human mechanic. For many it was unthinkable. Mark sat alone at a table near the corner, quietly eating his protein bar and reading a repair log on his datapad. Across the hall, Carell entered with her usual grace and authority, head high, silver skin shining under the lights. But this time the room didn't go silent because of fear. It went silent because everyone wanted to see what she would do. Her friends, a group of younger Viren officers, were already seated. They looked uncomfortable, One of them whispered, "You've been spending too much time with that human, Karel." "People are starting to talk," she smiled tightly. "Let them talk." Another officer, taller and sharper, leaned forward. "You're a commander's daughter. You shouldn't be lowering yourself to fix machines." "It's humiliating." Karel's smile faded. "It's called learning," that made the table laugh. "Learning? From a human?" The officer sneered. "Next you'll tell us he taught you manners." The sound of laughter echoed through the hall and Karel's face tightened. A hot wave of shame crawled up her neck. For a second her pride, her old self, rose again. She slammed her cup on the table and stood. Mark didn't even look up from his data pad. He'd seen this kind of moment before. Pride versus truth. He waited. Karel marched over to his table, her boots striking the metal floor. Every eye turned. The room grew still. "Human," she said loudly. "Tell them what you said to me yesterday. About respect." Mark blinked, surprised. He slowly put the data pad down. "Which part?" "The part where you told me I act like a leader without earning it." The crew froze. It was like the air itself stopped moving. A human had said that to a Viren noble, and she was admitting it publicly. Mark leaned back, calm as ever. "I said a leader isn't someone who gives orders," he replied, his voice steady but firm. "A leader earns trust, and trust isn't forced, it's built." Karel's friends exchanged looks of disbelief. "You're letting him talk to you like that?" One hissed. Karel turned slowly toward them. "He just saved this ship from exploding," she said. "And he did it while teaching me something none of you ever dared to." A murmur swept through the hall. Mark watched her carefully, not saying a word. Her voice grew quieter, steadier. "He didn't bow. He didn't fear me. He just stood there and told me the truth. And for the first time I listened." The Viren officer scoffed. "He's manipulating you." Karel stepped closer to the table, eyes burning. "No. He's showing me what strength really looks like." The officer opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Mark finally spoke again, his tone calm but cutting through the silence like a blade. "She doesn't need to defend me," he said softly. "She's learning to defend herself." That simple sentence hit harder than any insult. Karel turned toward him, her chest tightening, not from anger this time, but pride. The officer looked between them, fuming. "You're a disgrace to your bloodline, Karel." Mark stood slowly, meeting the alien's glare without fear. Then maybe her bloodline should be proud that she's finally acting like a real leader. The room erupted in whispers. No one dared to move. Karel stared at him, eyes wide. For a heartbeat she felt something she couldn't explain. Anger, gratitude, and something softer beneath it. After a long pause, she said quietly, "You talk too much, human." Mark smiled faintly. "Someone has to balance all your silence." The room filled with nervous laughter. The tension melted just a little. As Karel walked away, her friend stayed silent. The same alien girl who once shouted at everyone now walked like someone who didn't need to shout at all. Mark sat back down, watching her leave. He didn't smile this time. He just whispered to himself, "Maybe she's starting to get it." Outside the mess hall, Karel paused by the window, looking out at the stars. Her reflection stared back, changed. The old Karel would have destroyed anyone who embarrassed her. But this new one? She was learning something far more dangerous to her pride, respect. And deep down she knew this human wasn't trying to control her. He was helping her find herself. That realization, quiet and strange, felt heavier than any lesson she had ever learned. The storm began without warning. Karel was halfway through another repair drill with Mark when the entire dock shuddered. Sirens blared, lights flashed red, and a voice crackled over the intercom. "Warning, reactor surge detected in orbit. Viren transport ship Omega-7 is losing stability." Every worker froze. The Omega-7 carried hundreds of passengers, and it was drifting straight toward the planet's magnetic field. If its core ruptured, it would vaporize in seconds. Mark dropped his wrench and ran for the control deck. "Come on," he shouted. Karel followed, her heart pounding. The moment they entered, the chaos hit like a storm. Officers shouting, alarms screaming, sparks raining from the ceiling. The ship's holomap showed Omega-7 spinning violently, its orbit decaying. A commander turned sharply toward them. "We have lost the stabilization thrusters. We can't regain control." Karel stepped forward, instinct taking over. "Link me to the ship," she ordered. "We'll stabilize it manually." The commander hesitated, glancing at Mark. "With him?" Mark didn't wait for permission. If you want that ship alive, plug me in now. Within seconds, they were connected to Omega-7's system. The screens flickered, revealing the failing thruster grid. It was worse than expected. Multiple relays burned out, temperature rising fast. Karel clenched her fists. We can't repair that from here. We'll have to dock and fix it on board. Mark nodded. Then let's go. Minutes later, the two of them were in a shuttle racing through the upper atmosphere. Lightning flashed across the clouds as the crippled ship came into view. Massive, glowing red along its seams, spinning slowly toward disaster. Inside the shuttle, Karel gripped the console. If the core reaches overload, the entire ship will explode. Mark's voice was calm, even as turbulence rocked the craft. Then we'll just have to stop it first. They docked hard against the Omega-7's airlock. The moment they entered, smoke and heat rushed toward them. The corridors were dim, filled with frightened passengers and emergency lights flickering in red. Mark pulled out his toolkit. We head for the reactor. You keep the power lines stable. I'll handle the relays, Karel nodded, her heart racing. The air was thick, the floor shaking beneath their boots. Every second counted. When they reached the core chamber, the sight made her breath catch, molten lines of plasma leaking from the walls. Energy surging dangerously. Mark moved fast, connecting circuits, his hands steady despite the heat. I need 10 seconds to reroute the flow, he said. Hold that line steady. Karel pressed both hands on the control bar, channeling her strength to keep the coolant valves from bursting. The heat burned her palms, but she didn't let go. You're going to melt your hands again, Mark shouted. Then you'd better hurry, human. She yelled back through the roar. The reactor screamed as the ship tilted violently. Alarms blared louder. Sweat dripped from Mark's forehead as he twisted the final connector and slammed it into place. Now, he shouted. Karel pulled the main switch. The entire ship went dark for 2 heartbeats. Then the lights returned, steady and blue. The core temperature began to fall. The ship stabilized. The passengers cheered, their voices echoing through the metal corridors. The crisis was over. Karel stumbled exhausted as Mark caught her before she fell. You did it, he said softly. She looked up at him, eyes glowing faintly in the blue light. No, she whispered. We did. When they returned to the dock, the crew greeted them like heroes. Even the commander saluted the human, something unheard of in Viren tradition. Karel stood beside him, no longer as a superior, but as a partner. You didn't have to come, she said quietly as they walked out. Mark smiled, and missed the chance to prove that discipline saves lives. Not a chance, she laughed, tired but genuine. For the first time, she understood what true strength looked like. It wasn't power or fear or titles. It was standing firm when everyone else panicked. As they looked out the viewport, watching Omega-7 orbit safely again, Karel turned to him and said softly, You were right. Mark, fear doesn't fix engines. He looked at her and added, No, but courage does. And under the quiet hum of the stars, the alien girl who once shouted at everyone finally smiled, not as a princess, but as someone reborn through fire, sweat, and silence. The next day, the entire dock gathered in the command hall. It was a rare sight, humans, Virans, and workers from a dozen species standing shoulder to shoulder. Word had spread like wildfire. The Omega-7 had been saved, not by admirals or captains, but by a human mechanic and a young alien princess who once couldn't stand each other. Mark stood near the back of the crowd, wiping oil from his hands, trying to stay out of the spotlight. He hated attention. To him, fixing things was just the job. But today, the attention wasn't on him. It was on Karel. She walked onto the platform in full uniform, her head held high, her golden eyes sweeping across the room. The hall fell silent. The last time she had stood before them, she had shouted, demanded, and ordered. This time there was something different in her expression, something humble. She took a slow breath. I have words to speak, she began, her voice firm but steady. And for once I will not hide behind my title. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Even her father, Commander Vrax, was there, arms crossed, unreadable. Karel continued. When this mission began, I believed strength came from power, and respect came from fear. I was wrong, a murmur rose. She looked down briefly, gathering herself. A human showed me otherwise. Mark's head lifted slightly. Their eyes met across the room for a moment. Her gaze soft, his calm as always. She turned back to the crowd. When I shouted, he stayed silent. When I ordered, he refused. When I broke things, he made me fix them. I thought he was mocking me, but he was teaching me discipline, the kind that builds, not destroys. The hall was still. You could hear the faint hum of the station's engines through the walls. Carell stepped closer to the front of the platform. Yesterday, when the Omega-7 lost control, I saw what true leadership looks like. It doesn't shout, it acts. It doesn't demand loyalty. It earns it. Commander Vrak shifted slightly, his expression softening for the first time. Carell's next words carried a quiet strength that silenced even the skeptics. In our culture, apology is weakness. But today I give one willingly. To the human I insulted, to the crew I disrespected, and to myself, for confusing pride with honor. Gasps echoed through the hall. A Viren noble had never apologized publicly, especially not to a human. Mark stepped forward then, slow and steady, until he stood at the base of the platform. You don't owe me an apology, he said simply. You learned. That's enough, but Carell shook her head. No, it isn't, because what you gave me was more than a lesson. You gave me purpose. Her words hung in the air like light through mist. Then she did something that no one, human or alien, expected. She bowed. The room went silent. Every species in the hall froze in disbelief. A royal Viren bowing to a human, it was history. Mark blinked, awkwardly scratching his neck. You really don't have to. I do, she interrupted gently. Because you fixed more than an engine, Mark Rivers. You fixed me. For a moment, the crowd didn't know how to react. Then one by one, hands began to clap. Humans first, then aliens. Then the entire dock erupted in applause that thundered through the chamber. Mark smiled faintly, his eyes never leaving hers. You didn't need me, he said quietly once the noise settled. You just needed someone to tell you the truth. Carell smiled back. And you were the only one brave or foolish enough to do it. The two of them laughed softly, a sound that melted the last bit of tension in the room. When the meeting ended, Commander Vrax approached Mark. His voice was low but sincere. You've done something no warrior ever could, human. You taught my daughter humility. Mark nodded politely. She taught herself, sir. I just handed her the wrench. As the commander walked away, Carell turned to Mark. Her tone was lighter now. You realize they'll talk about this for years, don't you? Mark smirked. Then let's give them something worth talking about. They walked side by side down the corridor, past the staring eyes of dozens of crew members who now looked at them not with judgment, but with respect. And for the first time in her life, Carell didn't feel like she was walking ahead of someone or behind them. She was walking with someone, an equal, a partner, and perhaps something more. The alien girl who once thought power meant shouting had finally discovered that the quietest strength often came from the human heart. Weeks passed and the space dock returned to its usual rhythm, ships arriving, engines roaring, workers shouting across metal corridors. Yet for two people, everything had changed. Mark and Carell had become a strange but familiar sight now. The human and the alien princess, side by side, fixing machines, sharing coffee breaks, arguing about designs. The once hot-headed commander's daughter was now calm, focused, and grounded. The arrogance that once filled every word had softened into quiet confidence. One morning, Mark found her sitting alone near Dock 3, staring out through the massive glass window that showed the vast sea of stars. She wasn't in uniform. Instead, she wore simple clothes, her silver skin glowing faintly under the soft light. You're early, he said, setting his toolkit down beside her. Carell smiled slightly. You're late, he chuckled. I didn't know royalty cared about punctuality. Royalty doesn't, she said softly, eyes still on the stars. But engineers do. Mark sat beside her, watching the reflection of her face in the glass. She looked peaceful, different. You've changed, he said. I had to, she replied. If I didn't, I'd still be breaking things and calling it strength. He leaned back, resting against the wall. You did more than change. You learned. Carell turned to face him. And you taught without trying. They sat in silence for a while, the low hum of the dock filling the space between them. There was something comfortable in that quiet, an unspoken understanding that didn't need words. Finally, Carell broke the silence. I received orders from the Empire this morning. I'm being reassigned to the Frontier Fleet. Mark blinked. That's far. Farther than you can imagine, she said. Months of travel. No return until the mission's over. He didn't respond at first, just stared out at the drifting lights of the stars. Guess this is goodbye then. Carol looked down. Do you want it to be? Mark turned to her, meeting her golden eyes. No, he said quietly, but that's how life goes. People cross paths, fix things, and move on. She frowned, the faintest edge of sadness in her voice. You make it sound like I was just another engine to fix. Mark smiled softly. You were the hardest one. That made her laugh, a sound that felt warmer than any engine hum. But behind the laugh was something deeper, something that trembled just beneath her voice. I don't know how to say this the human way, she said, standing up. But where I come from, when someone changes your path, we call it a bond. Not friendship, not love, something beyond both. Mark stood too, surprised by the sincerity in her tone. And what do you call it? Carell's golden eyes shimmered under the light. We call it Tivaran, the unspoken tie, a connection that survives distance, silence, and time. He nodded slowly. Then, I guess we share one. For a long moment, neither spoke. The space dock seemed to fade away. Just two souls from different worlds standing on the same ground. Carell reached into her pocket and pulled out a small metallic shard, the broken piece of the console she had smashed on their first day. I kept this, she said, placing it in his palm. A reminder of who I was, and who I became. Mark looked at it, then at her. I'll keep it safe, she smiled. You'd better. It's part of a royal heirloom now. The announcement speakers buzzed overhead. Shuttle departing for Frontier Fleet in 10 minutes. Carell turned toward the exit, but paused after a few steps. Mark, yeah? If I ever lose my way out there. She hesitated, her voice softer than a whisper. Remind me what discipline really means, he smiled. You already know. She nodded once, then walked toward the docking gate. The air hissed as the doors closed behind her. Mark stood there for a long while, the small metal shard clutched in his hand. The hum of the engines filled the silence, steady and calm, just like her heartbeat had been beside him. Outside the window, her ship lit up, rising slowly into the dark sea of stars until it disappeared completely. He exhaled and whispered, almost to himself, Goodbye, Carell. And thank you. The stars blinked faintly, as if answering back. Somewhere in that endless void, a Viren girl smiled at the memory of a human who had once refused to bow, and in doing so, had taught her what it truly meant to stand tall. And so, their story didn't end. It simply continued across the stars. Bound by something stronger than distance, stronger than pride, an unspoken bond,